Okay, hello everyone. You're listening to the podcast of economic.bg called Edno, naum, which translates as bear in mind. I'm Ksenia Dimitrova, a project manager with the company. Today's episode is special for several reasons. First of all, this is the first episode that we record in English. And second, because we're going to discuss a somehow different and highly relevant topic, generative AI, deepfakes, and their impact on democracy. This episode is part of a research project called SOLARIS, in which Brand Media Bulgaria is a partner. This is a project supported by the European Union under its massive research program called Horizon Europe, and we're very excited to be part of this consortium. Actually, we're right now in Madrid on a partner meeting, and I'm here today with Andrew Макинтайър, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Amsterdam. This is another project partner in the consortium. Andrew, it is very nice to see you again and to welcome you to our podcast for this special episode of our podcast. Would you like to say a few words about yourself and your work?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. I'm very happy to be here and to talk about AI and politics and deepfakes more generally. As you say, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Amsterdam, where I work at the Institute for Logic, Language and Computation. Primarily, my research is focused on the socio-political impacts of generative AI. So, how AI-generated text or images will impact democracy, elections, how we talk about politics and culture more generally. And as part of that, I'm working on the SOLARIS project.
Great. So you're certainly the perfect person to be our guest speaking on today's topic. But before we dive deeper into the topic exactly, would you tell us why SOLARIS? What is the purpose of this project, and what is the team doing for like 3 years?
Yes, of course. So SOLARIS is, as I say, it aligns very well with my research because it is focused on exploring the socio-political challenges and opportunities of deepfake technologies. So we want to understand how these AI-generated images... Should I explain what a deepfake is potentially? Maybe I'll do that first.
I was hoping you could do that.
Okay, apologies. A deepfake, for anyone who maybe isn't aware, is essentially any kind of audiovisual content that is generated by an AI system. So that can include images, text, audio, but usually they involve representing or rather misrepresenting a person who exists in the world. So you may have seen online videos featuring politicians like Donald Trump or the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, where they are presented as saying something or doing something that they wouldn't do otherwise. And It looks very convincing because these AI systems have learnt to replicate their voice, their actions, their mannerisms, and these things have become very, very convincing indeed.
All right, thank you for this sort of a definition. I guess, at least I hope that our readers are already familiar with artificial intelligence, with the ChatGPT revolution, and many of them have tried their hands on generative AI, at least this class that deals with producing content and, as you said, deepfakes. But before we get into the details of these, is it accessible to everyone, or you need to have some special knowledge or skills to produce a deepfake?
Yes and no, essentially. So artificial intelligence technologies, as you say, with ChatGPT coming out in late 2022, they are widely available. Anybody can really use these programs, and you have lots of different kinds of AI image generator software available. And a lot of them are very user-friendly. That being said, that does not mean that everybody is able to make a very, very convincing deepfake. A lot of this takes a lot of resources, lots of money, time, skills. You would often need very specific performers to mimic the people you're trying to fake. So you need someone who looks like Donald Trump often to create something that looks very convincing, or that's one way of doing it. So yes, these technologies are available, and they are going to increase in sophistication and become much more widely available. But at the moment, we're not seeing people using these, all over the place. It's not widespread disinformation at this point.
Not yet. Luckily.
Yes.
Okay, when I hear the word fake, I instantly think of something bad, let alone when I hear a deep fake. But SOLARIS suggests that this is not always the case. Is a deep fake necessarily a bad thing, or it can also be used for good?
Well, that's what SOLARIS is trying to figure out. We are trying to make more of a point of talking about AI-generated media or AI-generated content rather than deepfakes. Because we've seen lots of people who are using deepfake technology online for completely harmless purposes, for fan casting in films or other silly things like that. Not everybody out there is trying to influence elections and cause havoc. So we want to move away from the idea of deepfake and talk more about AI-generated content. It may be fake content, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is harmful or disinformation.
Okay.
So, should I explain what SOLARIS is more?
Please.
Then we can cut that back in. Do you want to answer that question? So, AI-generated content will be fake, it is artificial, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is harmful disinformation. Not everything out there is being used to influence elections.
Okay, so is that what you call value-based content?
Value-based content is what we are trying to achieve.
All right.
So currently we have people using deepfake technologies, as I say, harmlessly for various activities. And then we also have people who are using it for harmful activities, political disinformation, deepfake pornography, this kind of thing. What we are trying to achieve with SOLARIS, we're trying to find a way of creating positive, pro-democratic deepfakes, and these will be value-based. And by that we mean we will be working with citizens to understand what kind of values they want AI systems to promote. They want what they want deepfakes to represent about them.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sure. So when you say we, you don't mean just researcher, as far as I understand, but how will you actually involve citizens in this in producing this value-based content?
Yes, of course. Yes. So that will be part of our project. One of the experiments is we will be working with one of our partners in Berlin to host workshops and brainstorming sessions with regular citizens, hopefully across a range of demographics, to understand what they want out of deepfakes, what they are comfortable with. Is it okay to have a deep fake of a historical figure who's potentially deceased? Is it okay to use a deep fake of a living person? These are the kinds of questions we want to know, and then how do they feel that these technologies should be used to for good, essentially, to promote democratic values.
Great, sounds super interesting and quite ambitious, actually. The first thing that pops into my mind as a question is when producing deep fake content, how do you ensure that the entire process is done in an ethical way? How do you ensure that the people who participate do not actually take this pretty seriously?
It's a voluntary project.
Okay.
I highly doubt that people who are nefarious are going to want to spend their time talking about deepfakes that won't be taking it seriously. Hopefully we would like everybody to be taking this seriously. We're not just going to invite people off the street. We're going to have a sort of a way of getting, as I say, a diverse range of people involved. and hopefully they will have some really productive discussions from this. We're not just going to take random suggestions. This is much more controlled.
All right. So it's going to be sort of open to everybody willing to participate. For instance, can we invite the audience of Economic BG to participate as well, or?
That is something we are currently deciding. It depends on, because in these workshops we will be showing deepfakes that we have made.
Okay.
And there is an ethical issue here about whether or not these might be, somebody might spread them from these workshops, and we need to understand the ethical and legal implications of that at the moment. So my answer is I'm not entirely sure at the moment, but watch this space, because we will be we'll be deciding that very soon.
Okay, so we're leaving this door open, and hopefully it will remain so. You said that you're going to create some examples of deepfakes, but you also said that this usually requires a person. I mean, do you have anybody in mind? Do you have some figure that's, I don't know, universally regarded as a positive example, or you will wait for the citizens to pick this figure?
Yeah, of course. We're currently deciding what kind of deepfakes we will show these people, and that sort of depends on what we want out of the experiments. The main example that we've been running with is the idea of Marie Curie.
Okay, I see.
And creating a deepfake of Marie Curie promoting women in STEM.
Okay.
So that's the kind of positive, pro-democratic deepfakes we want to make, but we're also going to explore some more diverse options as well.
Okay, can we call it a good fake then?
A good fake?
Probably.
We could do.
Okay, so good luck with that. I guess that this really is the novel part of the project, and it sounds so exciting, but yeah, we have been hearing voices of how artificial intelligence can be really useful in education, especially for those people who are disadvantaged in getting it, or might, I don't know, wish to study at their own pace. But let us go a little bit back to some recent examples which show us that so far deepfakes appear to be used mostly to do harm. You know, if we take the jokes aside that you also mentioned, in which a politician or a famous person is portrayed like doing some funny stuff. I can think of Tom Cruise performing funny dances on TikTok, or Pope Francis wearing these funny outfits. We have seen a lot of potentially harming content. You probably remember some of the examples of fabricated videos of Vladimir Zelensky announcing Ukraine is surrendering to Russia. I assume that this certainly can demotivate the army. Or we have seen images of this little girl trying to escape the Hurricane Helen in North Carolina, carrying her dog. No, it was a deep fake, but it was meant to show that authorities have abandoned the local population and, I suppose, to erode trust. What are your observations on this, especially with so many electoral campaigns this year that we have seen?
Yeah, I guess in one way we're sort of lucky. We haven't seen any truly devastating deep fakes come out this year, though we have seen smaller operations. I think there was an example in Pakistan where there were a number of deep fakes essentially trying to be used for voter suppression. Okay. But yeah, no, this is a really, really serious issue. I mean, we want to use these things for good and we want to explore that option. But as you say, primarily, there is a real concern that these will be used for harmful disinformation, not simply around elections where they can sway people's votes, but more generally eroding people's trust in democracy, in institutions, in media more generally. And this is just leading to further polarization, further distrust in society. So no, it's a really big problem. As I say, we haven't seen anything truly devastating yet, but that doesn't mean it isn't right around the corner. Yeah,
you're right. My observations are pretty much the same. Recently in Bulgaria, as you know, we've had our I don't know which parliamentary elections, and the stakes were as usually quite high, but nevertheless we have seen very little presence, very modest presence of deep fakes, or at least their impact has been very limited. I guess there's still more efficient ways to steer an election result in a particular direction here, or probably the deep fakes are not good enough. But do you maybe have an idea on what's the situation in Eastern Europe in terms of penetration of deep fakes, or is the project going to study this at all?
In terms of Eastern Europe, I think Eastern Europe is generally a bit more vulnerable to deep fakes given its proximity to Russia and potential conflicts. I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head, but it is a concern. As some of our colleagues have looked into this, they've been working in the Western Balkans and have been looking at the specific issues faced by the Western Balkans that are not that don't show up in other countries as well. Now, this is a sort of lack of technical infrastructure, a lack of funding,
lack of media literacy,
digital
initiatives, literacy as well.
All of this, and also a highly fragmented media landscape. Yeah. So people are getting their information from various different sources, and that's particularly a case in the Western Balkans, and that just makes it much more difficult to regulate and also to combat the spread of disinformation, which may go unnoticed by national broadcasters. Yeah.
I would add to this lack of trust in public institutions, which certainly contributes to spreading of all sort of disinformation, including deepfakes. But you mentioned the media, so I would like us to talk a little bit about the deepfakes and artificially generated content in journalism. I mean, we are a media company here, and we're obviously eager to explore the impact of these processes of media and journalism. That's why we're part of the project after all. Can you tell us how the project is going to study this?
Yes, so as I mentioned, one of our experiments is looking at deepfakes for good. One of our other experiments is primarily a simulation of how media organizations, journalists themselves, react to a particularly harmful piece of disinformation. This is our use case to one of our experiments, as I say, where we will have a live news desk in Italy, and we will create a convincing harmful deepfake, and we will simulate the spread of this piece of disinformation in controlled conditions. And we want to see how these journalists initially react. How do they treat it as a serious threat? Do they escalate it to these authorities? Do they engage with their audience to tell them this piece of fake news is out there? So that's how we're approaching deepfakes and journalism.
All right. Okay. You mentioned Italian journalism, Italian journalists. The project recently organized 2 very interesting webinars on deepfakes and democracy, and another one is on the way next year. Brand Media Bulgaria was helping you in a way to communicate this, and I remember an Italian journalist pointing out to the fact that journalists are no longer the first to produce news, because everyone is now with the quick access to social media and to all kinds of audiences. Everyone is now a small media outlet. On the contrary, now professional journalists' activities really slowed down as they have to perform even more diligent verification processes of their sources, a task that is increasingly difficult due to the ease with which this information can be produced. But in your opinion, and based on your research, in the context of SOLARIS, can we trust the news? Whom do we trust, and how do we decide this?
That is a huge question, whether or not we can trust the news. Generally speaking, yes, we can trust the news. the majority of news outlets are trustworthy sources. They may have their own political slants on things, their political skews, but generally these are trustworthy sources. But as our colleague at ANSA was making the point, it's that it's becoming much more fractured, as I said. Yes, we can trust the news. I mean, that's the issue. I don't want to sit here and say we can't, because that's an issue in itself, that we can't just stop trusting the media. We can't just stop trusting the information we see online. We just need to be a lot more critical about what we see. Trying to look not just at the information we see online, but the sources of that information. Is it from a reputable source? Is it from a large media organization, a national broadcaster, or whatever? Yes, we just need to be more critical about that.
Okay, so the good thing is that, in your opinion at least, the harm to journalism by the deepfake revolution has not been this serious to this point, up until now at least. I remember, by the way, I'm not sure if it's useful to bring a bit of psychological and cognitive dimension to this, but since you're in the logic studies, you also mentioned confirmation bias. This is the cognitive fallacy that causes us to seek only confirming evidence to prove what we already believe, rather than try and gather evidence to disapprove it, to make an informed opinion. In this sense, people would or would you agree that people would use deep fakes or even produce deep fakes to generate evidence that proves their point of view? Because I think it has been proven, or there are opinions that even if we later find out that something, some content that we have seen is false, we're still influenced by it, and we cannot ignore it simply. Do you have any ideas on that, any observations?
Yes, I will say that I'm in no way a psychology expert or any kind, but yes, it is the case that confirmation bias is an issue, and yeah, people will see fake news online and they may even recognize that it is fake, but share it anyway and promote it anyway because it aligns with their ideological biases or their ideological position. Whether or not people will start using this to generate evidence to support their claims, potentially. I mean, you could, as you mentioned with the hurricane in the US, that is promoting a specific narrative. Whether or not this will become widespread and people will start using AI to create evidence behind conspiracy theories and this kind of thing, I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I think the issue with confirmation bias is more that people don't really care if it's fake. That's an issue.
You're right, probably. All right, a less exciting topic. We're jumping from one side to the other, but it's highly relevant, and I cannot ask you about it. The regulation question, because I know that the project also studies this. The European Union has been the first international actor to try to regulate artificial intelligence with its AI Act. It aims to foster responsible AI development, deployment of the technologies in the Union. It has recently entered into force, but can we say it's already bearing results? Would you have any observations on this?
I mean, certainly it is bearing results for AI systems and the harms that they may have more generally, but my issue is that I don't believe that the AI Act sufficiently addresses the specific issue of AI-generated disinformation. It lists this as sort of a potential harm, and there are transparency obligations placed on AI systems, but I don't think the AI Act or really any other regulation is specifically addressing this issue in the way that I think it needs to be.
Okay, you think it needs to be, and you probably agree that there is a lack of effective tools and mechanisms to tackle this artificially generated misinformation. You mentioned that SOLARIS has something to do with policy innovations in this direction. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes and no, again, because we are only halfway through. We're still developing our policy recommendations. But yes, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that there is a lack of policy on this. Lots of people are talking about it, but they're just not talking about it as, you know, people often talk about, well, we have disinformation policies, so they will naturally extend to AI-generated disinformation. But AI enables disinformation on a much larger scale and in a much more convincing way. So it really is a game changer in this area. So what we've noticed from all of these different policies, all these different regulations, all these different strategies, is that there's a certain ambiguity and confusion around what is disinformation, how should we handle it, is disinformation something that sort of naturally occurs, somebody writes some fake news and it spreads from person to person who's interested, or is it something that needs to be addressed as a concerted, motivated campaign, often led by, let's say, foreign actors or people trying to disrupt democracy in other countries? Or is it a mixture of the two? What are the harms of disinformation? Is it psychological harms? Is it societal harms? You know, there's a lot of ambiguity here. So one of the main things I think that we want to address is that we need to get more specific with regulation and more specific with policy about AI-generated disinformation. How do we define it? How do we address it specifically? That's one of our main issues.
Okay, but the industry has already expressed criticism with this attempt of the Union to be the global leader of safe AI, but they claim that it's actually hampering innovation. You know, what would you say about this? Do you need even more of that, and how can we prevent this negative impact on innovation capacities of the Union?
Certainly. Yes, I mean, well, innovation is obviously important. It really matters. AI isn't, I'm not sitting here saying that AI is this terrible, evil thing. It's just that it can be used for some really devastating effects. And if this regulation, I think this regulation is necessary. Okay. And that may be an issue for businesses, but I mean, chaos, disinformation, that's also bad for business. Okay. You know, if we want to think about it in those terms. So I think these regulations are necessary to protect the good of Europe more generally.
Okay, then you said that SOLARIS is sort of we're halfway through the project. Briefly speaking, can you tell us what the main achievements are of this consortium and what are we to expect yet?
Yes, of course. So far, we have conducted a lot of research, primarily looking at what kind of actors are involved in the production, circulation, and impact of AI-generated disinformation. So when I see a deepfake online, I have to recognize that it's not just me and the machine, or it's not just me and this image. There are lots and lots of other social actors at play. So who made it? Who shared it? What are their political allegiance? So we've been working quite hard to map out who are these people, and then how can policy or regulation be used to intervene when people are using these for harmful effects. So that's one of the aspects we've been working on. Behind the scenes also, we have been developing, we've been preparing for the experiments that are coming up. We have our first experiment, which will be, we will be trying to figure out what are the different factors that affect whether or not a person is convinced by a deepfake. We've been working with psychologists at the University of Maribor, who have been developing a psychometric scale, basically a way of figuring out what different factors affect somebody's judgment. We've also been setting up this other experiment, which is the simulation with journalists in Italy. And finally, we've been working on this final experiment, which is the development of deep fakes for good, or good fakes, as you like to call it, working with citizens. So we've been doing a lot of the prep work for the past year and a half. This coming year, we're going to start doing the experiments and getting those results and really making some concrete policy recommendations off the back of that.
All right, so from what I understand, we should meet again in 1 year. So you have some more, even more interesting stuff to tell us. But at the end of our conversation, I would like to once again make a reference to your affiliation with the Institute for Logic at the UVA, the University of Amsterdam, and ask you, what is the impact of generative artificial intelligence on natural intelligence and critical thinking? Do you have any observation on this? Will AI soon become better than us? Is it going to be this year or next year at problem solving?
Well, that is a very broad question. Again, I'm not a cognitive scientist of any kind, but I guess the impact on, first things first, I personally do not believe that AI will surpass human intelligence.
No?
It can certainly problem solve much better than us, and it can generate text and very sophisticated things much better than us. But I don't think that necessarily constitutes intelligence. There's a lack of contextual awareness. You know, AI systems don't understand the impact of the things they generate. That's why we're in this harmful situation. So I don't think that's a very philosophical sort of argument about how that'll impact human intelligence. More broadly, there's an issue that, you know, everybody is using AI now to generate essays or articles or images, all kinds of things, and not harmful things, just everyday things. The issue with that is that AI is starting to contribute to our collective knowledge as a society. And it does so in a way that is similar to humans but has really distinct differences as well. So we have AI that is quite biased and is inaccurate, or, as I say, doesn't consider the impact of its content. So how is that changing how we interact with one another? How does that change our social systems more broadly? We're seeing a very sort of fundamental change, or we're experiencing a fundamental change right now. What that impact will be, I'm not sure, but I think research projects like SOLARIS are necessary to sort of make sure that the very harmful uses of this technology are addressed.
Okay, that was in a way a sort of positive conclusion. Would you like to add anything to this conversation?
I'm not sure if it was that positive. Now I think of it.
Well, at least you admit that you believe that AI will not overtake us. That's an opinion that's not widely shared, by the way. So.
Oh well.
That's the positive side of it.
Well, yes, I suppose I'm not into this discussion about whether or not AI is this much grander existential threat, how it's going to take over and rule over us or anything like that. I don't really believe in that because I think that that's actually more of a distraction. I think we need to be talking about the really practical issues right now, which is AI generated disinformation, bias in AI, the use of AI for oppression. I think the broader idea of AI taking over and this sort of Terminator-esque future is a bit of a fantasy and a bit of a distraction in a way.
Okay, so I challenge you to be our guest again in 1 year when we will see if what you said is true.
When AI is taken over,
and hopefully you will have some more even more practical results of the project to show us. Thank you very much for being our guest at the podcast of economic.bg. And to our readers, if you want to be, and listeners of course, if you want to be involved in the discussion on the development of artificial intelligence, sign up for news of the SOLARIS project and follow us. How to follow us? Of course, the website will be posted in the description of this podcast. We have a newsletter and regular updates about upcoming events on social media. So thank you once again. This was Andrew Макинтайър from the University of Amsterdam.
Thank you very much for having me.